Well, The Witcher 4. You know, I always thought that The Witcher 4 was just going to be a placeholder title. And I have to say it's a bit disappointing that the game, by all appearances, appears to be actually called The Witcher 4, which is not very creative in my book. But The Witcher 4 it is. Now, I have to say at the outset that I am feeling very, very skeptical about this game for a number of reasons. I've noticed that most people have expressed excitement and joy at seeing the cinematic trailer, but for me, it best evokes feelings of caution and skepticism. And I'll tell you why. And there are a bunch of reasons for this. Well, rather obviously, it appears to be that Ciri is going to be the protagonist of the next game, The Witcher 4. Again, not a very creative title, but it is what it is. And a lot of people had called this. A lot of people had thought, what would make logical sense here? You have Geralt, his story is over. Ciri. But in a sense, Ciri's story was over too, sort of, right? So right off the bat, we have the issue of CD Projekt Red canonizing one of the endings from Witcher 3, where she chooses to become a witcher, so to speak, at least in practice. Again, that's the biggest issue here. We'll talk about that in terms of being an actual witcher later. So the two other endings become invalidated. Either the one where she perishes to the White Frost despite her stopping it, or the ending in which she becomes the Empress of Nilfgaard. So, okay, that's the official canon ending. It is what it is. I'm not thrilled about that lack of choice, and it is yet another reason why I would have preferred a completely new character. I will talk about that later. The biggest red flag here, and it's something that almost nobody is talking about, at least in terms of the actual content producers on YouTube, is that Ciri isn't just a witcher in the sense that she's playing the role of a witcher. She is a physiological witcher. She has the cat eyes. She consumes the witcher potions, which are the result of very toxic decoctions that are essential to make these potions. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But let's start with a thing that doesn't make any sense at all. Ciri is a being who possesses the Elder Blood. She at the very least possesses the ability to teleport, traverse dimensions, very powerful, and indeed do other things. She possesses, we know from The Witcher 3, the ability to simply project massive amounts of destructive arcane energy, and we know that she used the Elder Blood power to stop the White Frost. But for Witcher 4, had she retained her Elder Blood powers, well, that would have been a little bit too much, too OP to play as a lowly witcher. So I'm sure there will be some story, maybe a retcon, almost certainly a retcon, whereby she has lost her powers. And there are two possibilities here. The first possibility is that in stopping the White Frost, she lost her Elder Blood powers, which doesn't really make sense because it's part of her DNA. It's inherited. The idea that it would be just zapped out of her, there's no indication of that in The Witcher 3 towards the ending, but that's a possibility. The other possibility, which is arguably just as absurd, is this idea that she lost her Elder Blood powers due to the process of becoming a witcher, an actual physiological witcher. And therein lies the rub. Therein lies my biggest problem with this trailer, with what they're presenting. We know from the Witcher universe that you cannot have female witchers. They tried this. They tried to apply the techniques, the processes to females, and they all died, no exceptions. Indeed, most of the males died when trying to survive the trial of Grassus, as it is called. And due to the fact that all the females died as a result of the trial of Grassus, aka the Witcherian process, they decided a long time ago that that's just not an option. We're not going to make female witchers. So what do you need to do in order to create a female witcher? You absolutely need to retcon the hell out of the game. You need to come up with a story that is at least somewhat plausible, that explains how a woman can become a witcher, especially a woman in adulthood, right? Because let's remind ourselves, the witchers who became witchers and survived the trial of the Grassus did so in a state of adolescence, not as fully grown adults. We have no idea how the Witcherian process interacts with that. presumably not particularly well. So we have a female Witcher. And if I had to guess here, what CD Projekt Red is going to do is they're going to retcon the history and the lore of becoming a Witcher by saying, well, the thing about Ciri is she had the Elder Blood, which allowed her to survive the trial of the Grassus, but in the process it burnt out her powers. That's going to be the official explanation, and I don't think that's a particularly great explanation, mind you. I think it's lazy, but a lot of people are just going to accept it. Most people who play games are not sticklers for lore. I'm the one with the stick up my butt, so to speak, when it comes to these things, admittedly. But that's probably going to be the explanation. She became a Witcher vis-a-vis the trial of Grassus because she had the Elder Blood, which allowed her to survive it, but she lost her Elder Blood powers in the process. Okay, there's a solution, I guess, but then you have another problem. And the problem is the trial of the Grassus itself. You see, we know from the lore that the secret of making new Witchers has been lost. And there are a number of reasons for this. The attack on Kaer Morhen around something like 1165, where you had this angry mob of fanatics and rogue mages that attacked the School of the Wolf stronghold, and most of the Witchers died there, and they lost a lot of the instructors, and so a lot of the laboratories and the equipment were lost in order to make the process even viable. Then you lost the alchemists and mages that helped facilitate the process to begin with, people that basically made the concoctions that allowed for the existence of the trial of the Grassus in the first place. And so most of these specialists either died in time or were killed. And most importantly, the knowledge concerning the trial of the Grassus was a closely guarded secret, almost top secret. The exact formulas and procedures for creating the mutagens and performing the trial of the Grassus were, as I just said, closely guarded secrets, often only known to a few individuals at each school. And when these people died, most of this knowledge, if not all of it, was lost. So nobody knows how to make a Witcher. Not anymore. And so they need to come up with a completely new formula. Generally speaking, the lore is such that we don't really know what the formula is. Very few male adolescents survived the trial of the Grassus, and women just didn't, period, end of story. So again, this is going to be a retcon. And that's fine, but we need to also talk about the reason why they are implementing Ciri, as opposed to a brand new protagonist. The very obvious reason is she's a beloved character from the series, there's a point of connection to The Witcher 3, and people like that sort of thing. They like seeing recurring characters. But to be perfectly honest, I think it would have been much more effective if they had allowed you to create your own Witcher character, and specifically, in keeping with the lore, a male protagonist. Now, I don't have anything in and of itself against a female protagonist in a game, that's fine, but again, given what we know about the Witcher universe, it's a very odd fit. There are female sorceresses, that would have been an interesting choice, but given the lore constraints, I think a self-created Witcher male would have been a better choice, in the same sense as Cyberpunk, where you can design the Witcher by yourself, but he has a fixed voice, and he has a fixed protagonist arc, so to speak. However, that's not what we're going to get, and so we're getting Ciri. I have some nitpicks about the aesthetics here. Obviously, Ciri is now older, but instead of making her look older, they gave her the appearance in the trailer as if she had been injecting Botox into her face, because when you get older and you remain slim and fit, what happens is your face loses elasticity. It looks more hollowed out, it looks rougher, and instead we see a Ciri that does look older, who still looks fit. She's very slim, but her face looks bloated, which is very odd. In fact, it doesn't make any sense at all, but I suppose you could come up with an argument that due to the trial of the Grassus, which apparently she survived, due to her Elder Blood, we can assume that's the case, it made her face really bloated. Now this is just a cinematic trailer, obviously. We have no idea what the in-game character model of Ciri will look like, but ultimately, I am firmly convinced that a new male Witcher protagonist with a new trilogy would have been much more effective and much more interesting, but they decided against that. In general, I'm very skeptical of AAA games these days. I'm exceptionally skeptical about CD Projekt Red as a studio. They've shown things of late that have made me even more skeptical than I was before, including hostile exchanges on the part of developers of The Witcher 4 towards a woman on Twitter, for example. There was a hostile exchange there. Not very encouraging, because it reminds me of the thing that went down with Avowed. And more broadly, the obsession that CD Projekt Red has developed, along with many other AAA studios, with real-life politics and injecting it into fantasy settings. And this potentially could be related to the retcon of the lore that states that there can only be male Witchers due to the process of the Trial de Graces. Who knows? It could be something else, but it's certainly a possibility. So I'm looking at The Witcher 4 with a very healthy dose of skepticism, a massive dose. I feel absolutely zero excitement towards this game because I just don't know if CD Projekt Red can deliver anymore. Lest we forget that the launch of Cyberpunk 2077 was disastrous on multiple fronts, and yes, eventually they cleaned it up, they patched things up, they eliminated the bugs, and now it's quite a good game. But despite those ameliorations to Cyberpunk 2077, despite the fact that CD Projekt Red did work hard on improving the game and getting rid of the issues, that does not entirely disqualify their past sins, their marketing, etc., etc. So we have no idea if this is going to be a good game. They're trying to get people on the hype train. They're trying to get people on the hype train above all with nostalgia, which is another reason they're probably using Ciri as a protagonist. And frankly speaking, I'm not buying into it. Not yet. We have to see a lot more, and we need to see and hear very good, convincing lore explanations for why Ciri is now a physiological Witcher as opposed to just a Witcher in practice. Because at this point in time, the only explanation we can come up somewhat logically is that the Elder Blood allowed her to survive the Trial de Graces, and they created a new Trial de Graces that was somehow fitted or suited to female physiology as an adult, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'm feeling very meh about this, quite neutral with a bunch of skepticism, but ultimately I can't be sure. These are just my thoughts, these are just my takes. And speaking of which, if you like my content and you like my takes, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. It's much appreciated as it helps out the channel, and I'll check you out next time. Take care.